everybody. It's great to see you today. Today is June 11th, and we are in the throes of summer. I hope you are enjoying your summer. Welcome to my home. Thank you so much for inviting me into yours. And today we are in the book of Kings. We have been studying the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, kind of took a break from the Kings, but now we're back in the Kings and we're back in the history books. I know many of you told me that you just loved Proverbs, and I did too. There was so much wise concepts in there that were practical. And I know one of you had put on the blog, this is just such practical advice. If people would follow this, how much better our lives would be. And that is so true. Today we're talking about the Kings, and I've entitled the lesson, The Hardships of Unwavering Obedience, because we get to study the life of Elijah today. And I want to show you some things about his life that I think will make you be able to better identify with him and all of God's prophets. It was hard for him, and I'm going to show you how hard, and life in following God can be hard for us as well. So we're going to get to relate to Elijah today. I'm going to start by giving you some background into some of the things that you're reading. I know over the past couple of days we've read a lot about different kings, and actually over the last couple of days we have read of the period that we've read about spans 60 years. So we have seen this king and then succeeded by this king and this king and this king, and it's hard sometimes to keep up with all their names. You don't have to remember all of the kings' names of the southern kingdom, Judah, and the northern kingdom, Israel. And do know that when you're reading in the text, though, when they talk about Israel, from now on, they're talking about the northern 10 tribes, not Judah and Benjamin. Those two southern tribes are called Judah in the Bible. So that's something that you need to understand. I'm going to cover a little bit about the false religion. And while I said you don't have to remember the names of all the kings, there are a few that you probably should really get to know and recall. In the reading today, King Ahab, A-H-A-B, King Ahab is in the north. He's one that you're going to want to remember. He's married to this woman named Jezebel. And Jezebel was a very evil woman. But today I'm going to give you some insight into her life and where she's coming from. And in the south, we have King Jehoshaphat. And that is a wonderful story about him and how he leads praise before the battle. And we're going to talk about that. I think that's coming next week, actually. So he's a real cool king. He's a good king. Now, speaking of good kings, as you're reading about the kings, it will be helpful to you if you kind of keep track and look for, oh, is this guy a good king or a bad king? It's usually always specified, this was a good king, and then look for why. What made him good versus bad? It always has something to do with his relationship with the Lord. It never in the Bible has to do with, well, he built a great palace, or the bridges that he built lasted 200 years. That had nothing to do with him being good or bad. It was all his relationship, his spirituality. So let's start with a reference. I want to remind you of something. I think it was yesterday. It may have been the day before, but it was in 1 Kings 14:23. Here's the scripture, and here's what it means. And this is pretty foundational to understand this whole week's reading. This verse says, people built Asherah poles, high places, sacred pillars on every high hill and lush tree in Judah during Rehoboam's reign. Now, Rehoboam was Solomon's son. About 60 years ago, he reigned in the southern portion. He took over after Solomon. And these Asherah poles we are going to read about, and God completely condemns them. And so we need to understand what that is. These Asherah poles were part of the worship of a false worship. It was idol worship, where the surrounding nations that were living around Israel, and it was the national religion of the women that these men in Israel were marrying. So you marry a woman, she brings a lot of her stuff with her, her beliefs, her practices, her traditions of her own family, and there you have it. And so Israel is worshiping false gods. Asherah, Asherah, is singular for this female goddess. Asherim, I am on the end, is plural. And Asheroth, OTH, is also plural. You may see it written. So it means the same thing. She is a Canaanite goddess. She is the fertility goddess of the sea. She's worshipped in in Damascus, the northern area. It's also referred to as Aram, Aram. When we talked about the Phoenicians, the people of the sea in the north, where King Solomon, remember the king of Tyre, King Solomon got all the wood and the cedar and everything to do all these buildings. That was their formal religion. According to Babylonian mythology, she was the mother goddess. She was the wife of El, the head god, and she was the mother of 70 gods. So even today, we have a religion today that worships a mother god, Mary, and this religion is very similar to that. They are worshiping a mother goddess. Baal, Baal, a god that we've already read about, we will continue to read about, was her son, so she was the mother of Baal. So they worshipped Baal, that god, and so naturally they worshipped, or they thought they needed to worship the mother goddess. Okay, people would erect poles, these Asherah poles, in her honor. They would carve her image out of a tree, and remains have actually been found archaeologically. Rotted timber, of course the timber's been rotted away, but they could see where the post hole remained in cities like Shechem and other places in Israel. We see it prevalent not only in the north, but it was prevalent in Judah during Rehoboam's time. Rehoboam allowed it. Remember, he was the son of Solomon. He allowed this form of idolatry, and his mother, who was one of Solomon's wives, Machal, Maacal, she did it too, and later on her grandson is going to tear down these poles and just tell the grandmother to stop. But as of today, that hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. So who is Jezebel? Jezebel is Ahab's wife. She is actually the biggest supporter of Asherah and Baal worship in Israel. She has an agenda, and the reason she has an agenda can be easily understood. Her capital is in Samaria. It's the center of worship for this god. And the reason is her father was a priest in Sidon, Sidon, and he actually got to be king. He was the priest, but he got to be king because he killed the king and he took over. So his daughter, Jezebel, is a princess. She's the daughter of a king. Call it a rightful king, an unrightful king, who knows, but he's the king of this northern territory now, north of Israel. And she has been aligned with Ahab. I'm sure it was considered a political marriage at the time. And I guess they were hoping for peace between these two nations. So many foreign treaties are designed that way. And she was a pagan missionary. You have to think about it like that, because her father was the priest of one of the many priests of this goddess Asherah. So she naturally thought this was the right thing to do. And it kind of sounds like the whole concept in the Middle East today. You know, they believe their beliefs and they're just not open to any other ideas. She wasn't either. Her whole life's mission was to bring worship of her God into Israel, and unfortunately it succeeded. We have to understand too that it was an acceptable practice for a foreign queen to have a sanctuary of her own religion in the new land. So she was considered a foreign queen, and she just was very successful in getting the people to transfer their worship from Yahweh and worship this foreign god. Mount Carmel, let's talk about this. When Elijah comes against Baal, it's Elijah versus 450 of these Asherah priests, these Baal priests. And I want to tell you about Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is near the sea. An altar was once there. It's a central location in all of Israel. And this challenge that you're reading about is between Yahweh, our God, and between Baal, their God. Baal is the god of storm and lightning, which is kind of humorous because they've been in a drought. They've been calling to him. Not only have they been in a drought and he doesn't bring the rain, Baal doesn't bring the rain, but did you notice in the reading when Elijah lets them go first in this contest, and they say, let's see which God can light the fire and light this altar, because they've put wood on it, and they're trying to call on Baal to, as the god of lightning, to make this thing come into flames. They call to him all day long, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. 3 p.m. is the time of the evening sacrifice. It's actually the time that Jesus was crucified on the cross. It's the time that they sacrificed their afternoon sacrifice. And at 3 o'clock, Elijah has said, this is long enough. You've had 6 hours. Your God isn't doing anything. Let me call on Yahweh and see what happens. He doesn't just call on Yahweh, but he pours gallons and gallons of water all over this altar, and it is good and soaking wet. Then he calls on the name of God, and God immediately makes it go into flames and lapping up all of the water, and the people are like, woo, Yahweh is God. I guess they needed that reminder. And as a result of that, the people that were there were hundreds or maybe even thousands of Israelites there worshiping this contest. They then killed all of the prophets, the 450 prophets, and I know that might seem harsh to some of you, but go back to Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 to 5. The law requires execution of these false worshipers. Now let's talk about the life of Elijah for just a minute. Elijah thinks he's the only one left. He is afraid. He has asked the Lord to bring down fire, and he was successful in this battle. He has unwavering obedience throughout his life to the Lord, and he is asked to do difficult things, as most prophets are. In the reading today, did you notice that one time God gave him superhuman strength to run faster than a chariot? That happened. Did you know that he traveled 40 days and 40 nights, going someplace just like Jonah he wasn't supposed to be? That's why God ended up saying, why are you here? He felt so alone in his worship of Yahweh and so discouraged at the culture around him that he actually asked God to kill him. He wanted to die. There were 2 other prophets in the Old Testament that also asked God to die. And do you remember who they were? It was Moses and Jonah. So he is very discouraged, felt that he was the only one loyal to Yahweh. And isn't it discouraging when you feel like you're the only one that's doing the right thing in your life, or you're the only one that believes in God? It's really hard to live that way, and it was really hard for Elijah to live that way too. But God told him that there were 7,000 people that were true to him, and that he was not the only one. Sometimes we cannot live by just the things that we can see in the world around us. We have to live by faith. God calls us to live that way, and we have to certainly know and trust that we're not the only one. In James 5:17 it says, Elijah was just a regular guy, just like you and I. Isn't that amazing? Because sometimes we see the prophets as having superhuman strength or superhuman faith, but they're just normal people, just like you and me. They just choose in their life to follow God at any cost. Now, Elijah had a private ministry for 3 years in the forest. That was a little story about the ravens. And then God said, go. There is always a time where God calls us to a private ministry, and there are times when God calls us to a public ministry. Did you know, though, that what you do with God in private is more important than what you do for Him publicly. Your hidden life prepares you for your public life. So how is your private life with God? Are you in the Word? Are you seeking Him? Are you praising Him? Are you praying regularly with Him? Do you pray with Him regularly throughout the day? As Paul commanded us to do, pray without ceasing. You know, Elijah's life teaches us that we have to go through a dry brook, depleted oil, and a dead boy to have the victories of Mount Carmel. It's not always going to be victorious. It's not going to seem like that in our walk with the Lord, for there are going to be times where we are discouraged just like he was, fearful just like Elijah was. But we can take comfort in knowing that God is with us, He is directing our steps, and He will make sure everything turns out right in the end. Isaiah 40:31 reminds us that they who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. So here are my questions for you today. What can you see in your life that maybe is a distraction from worship? There were certainly things in the life of the Israelites that were distractions to them. Is there anything that you can see, or perhaps that you need to pray over for God to reveal to you that is a distraction to you in your worship? Certainly there will be hardships of unwavering obedience, but certainly the blessings will far overcome any hardships that we have. For knowing the Lord our God is the most precious thing that we can possibly pursue, the most worthy thing that we can possibly pursue in our life. So let me end today giving you encouragement. See in the life of Elijah that he had troubles too, but he never wavered from being obedient, and he never questioned the Lord. He simply followed and did what he said. Oh, if we could have that kind of unwavering obedience in our life as well. Well, I hope this lesson has been a blessing to you. We're going to continue in the history books over the next couple of days. I can't wait to see you again. Blessings to you and your family.